started talking a little bit about avian influenza, a little bit about what it is, how it spreads, some of the signs, what we can do to prevent it. However, if it wasn't for the fact that the grant paying for me to be here says I have to talk about avian influenza, we would be substituting that for any other disease out there with chicken, realistically. The diseases chickens get, they transmit the same way, they cause a lot of the same symptoms. Chickens aren't real creative in how they show that they're not feeling well. So this is about that disease. This is a topic this community is probably fairly well versed in. You guys led the nation. The first case of avian influenza in the nation was about 8-9 miles south of here last year, December 19th of 2014. Made my world significantly changed. So we know we have it around. So we'll talk about a little about it and what you can do to protect your birds from. So it is an influenza virus, very similar to the influenza viruses we have in humans, not quite the same. It primarily infects wild and domestic poultry, chickens, turkeys, quail, waterfowl, so your ducks, your geese, and some of the migratory shorebirds, not so much the seagulls, but more like the pelicans, the ones that actually migrate up and down the coastline. Those wild waterfowl are the important ones. They're what we call a reservoir species, so they can get infected with this virus, and they don't get sick. So, and they don't die from it. So we've got these little virus factories flying all up and down the west coast, leaving little pockets of virus everywhere they go. So that's what we're concerned about. That's how this disease spreads.
How is the water? Why are the waterfowl just an age?
Ask me afterwards, and I'll explain. We can go into a lot of detail on that if you want to know. So this is what the virus looks like. This is obviously an artist's rendering because virus is microscopic. But we categorize these viruses a couple different ways when we talk about influenzas and birds. One of the most common ones you'll hear is this highly pathogenic or low pathogenic avian influenza. This literally means either it kills the bird or it doesn't. Highly pathogenic, they kill birds. They kill our chickens. There's last spring when we had this in the Midwest and some of the commercial flocks, there were turkey barns with 25,000 birds in it. They'd go in the morning, everyone was fine. That night, they'd go and half the birds were dead. Next morning, 90% of the birds were dead. That's what these viruses have the potential to do. That's why we're concerned about them. We also have low pathogenic. They're ones that they may cause your birds to sneeze a little bit. You may lose one or two, but they don't cause a lot of death. The other way we differentiate influenza viruses, and this crosses over to some viruses that don't actually affect chicken, avian strains as well. Swine flu is one of those. Is these by an H number and an N number. You guys may have heard like H1N1, H5N1. The H and the N, H stands for hemagglutinin. That's this little purple bump on the outside. N stands for neuraminidase, the little blue bump. Really not important, other than that there's a whole bunch of these. There's 18 different strains of the hemagglutinin, there's 9 strains of neuraminidase. You get like 168 total strains of influenza viruses out there that can affect just poultry. That's just the ones that affect poultry. There's only one of those that has ever infected a person, and that's H5N1. It's the Eurasian strain of H5N1. Has never been diagnosed in the Western Hemisphere. Only in Southeast Asia, the Middle East, that are some of the sub-Saharan Africa. Nowhere else. So your food's safe. These strains, they may kill lots of chickens, turkeys, geese. They won't make you sick. So there's not a food safety concern. We don't have to be worried about our food. It is safe.
So consuming their eggs is still safe?
Yes, except for that, and we'll talk about it in a minute. They generally die within like 16, 18 hours of this. So you probably won't have eggs to consume anymore. And it's not just one, it's the whole flock that gets infected. So yes, it would be safe, and actually cooking kills the virus even if it was a potential problem. So salmonella, the bacteria we're worried about, why we cook chicken and eggs and everything at 165 degrees, it's killed at like 158 degrees. That's why we cook to that temperature. Influenza viruses are killed at like 123 degrees, I think. So when you can have an egg over easy still running and it's warm enough. You can just about stick the egg in your pocket for an hour, and it gets warm enough to kill the virus. I mean, it doesn't take much to kill the virus.
Not still running.
So the main way that this virus, and really most of our chicken diseases we worry about move is direct contact. Both cases of this virus we had in Oregon, that's what happened. They had a pond in their back, out in the pasture right behind the barn, and they had a bunch of chickens at free range, and some ducks that were theirs, and they had some wild ducks that came in, and they actually attracted the wild ducks in, because I mean, wood ducks are beautiful ducks. You know, some of these wild ducks are beautiful. But then you had your ducks swimming on the pond with the wild ducks, and the wild ducks have virus, which means now your ducks have virus, and then your ducks go back to the barn and eat out of the same feeder that your chickens eat with, and so now your chickens have the virus, and now your chickens are all dead. And that's what happens in these cases. There's other ways that it can spread also. Indirect contact, contaminated surfaces, materials, sharing equipment, going to the city park, walking around the duck pond, coming back home without cleaning off your boots, going duck hunting. Any of those kind of ways can also transmit these things. What's that? The water can too. Yeah, so an interesting little tidbit. Water, at 40 degrees in water, this virus can live over 100 days. At 85 degrees in direct sunlight, when it's dry, it's a matter of minutes. The UV light will kill it, but in cool temperature, cool aquatic environments, which here in Western Oregon we wouldn't know anything about 40, 45 degrees and wet, it can live forever, just about. And the reason they say 100 days is the researchers gave up sampling because they had a paper they had to publish. At 100 days, they could still find it. So we know it goes past that. They just didn't keep going. So, and again, the wild ducks and geese are the reservoir. That's what we have to worry about. The starlings, sparrows in your backyard, they can transmit some other things, mites, those kind of things, management issues, but they don't transmit this virus unless they stepped in duck poop and came to your poop and wet you. So,
Not gonna happen.
yeah, not quite so much. So just again, this highly pathogenic avian influenza, it spreads really quickly, and the infected birds, normally what we see is they just die. We don't see symptoms. If you do, it's a matter of an hour or two that you notice something. Most cases, people will say they go out at night, feed, everyone's fine, they go out the next morning and they've got several dead birds. That's actually how the case here in this area started. Is every night he'd feed and everyone was fine. The next morning there'd be 8 or 10 more birds that were laying on the ground dead. Yeah.
If there was maybe 5 birds that didn't get the rest of them, and the other birds all died, could those still live birds get it from the dead birds?
Yep. That is a very good question.
She has a question.
Yeah.
If your whole flock dies, can you clean the area, or are you gonna not be able to?
Yep, you can. Commercially, if when we have commercial barns that get hit, they clean it, and within like 4 or 5 weeks, they're able to put new birds back in that barn.
How would
We'll talk about that. We'll talk about that in just a minute. And actually, if it's your flock, you don't have to clean it. We'll do it for you. And Big Daddy government will pay for it too. So it works out. If it's gonna happen,
It's free,
No,
but it's
it's
not
not
free.
free.
You know how that works,
Yeah.
right? Just like Dr. Ryan here tonight. Free, but he's not free.
yeah,
birds.
yeah.
That's right.
So a couple other things. These aren't so much signs of influenza as they are just signs of disease, signs you may have problems. Lowly pathogenic avian influenza can manifest these ways. We can see some of these signs. Lack of energy, lack of appetite, decreased egg production, soft-shelled, misshapen eggs. These aren't necessarily just a symptom of disease. They can be a symptom of malnutrition. Maybe they aren't getting enough water. Different things cause it, but there's something that's not right.
Yes, you have to do. I say you do your CSI investigations.
Yeah.
Why? If you have young chickens and this is the first egg you ever find, that's not such a big deal. But if you have chickens that are 2 or 3 seasons old, 2 or 3 years old, and you find one of these, you might have a problem.
Yeah. Signs of respiratory sickness. So influenza viruses obviously are a respiratory disease. There's lots of other diseases that can cause respiratory problems, but the combs, the wattles, the eyelids, basically any skin that's actually visible will swell up. You'll see bluish, purplish discoloration. Same as a person that has real bad pneumonia, isn't getting enough oxygen, their skin kind of turns purple, they can swell a little bit. So we do see that in chickens. Runny nose, coughing, sneezing, it's not always going to be to that extent. But diarrhea, and then again, sudden death. We put that in a second time and really reiterate that's what we're dealing so it's a common practice in commercial operations. It keeps them from biting each other. So there's some neurologic things you may see with some of these things too. Tremors, drooping wings. You know, these are pretty obvious. When you start looking at neurologic things, it's pretty obvious there's probably something wrong with that chicken that's head is turned
He's
upside
not
down.
just special.
So there are diseases that can do that. There's some injuries and other things that can do that too. But again, there's something wrong. So how do we protect our birds? So there's 3 ways we can protect them from dying of diseases, and that's true with any animals, even humans. We can treat them if they get sick, antibiotics, that kind of stuff. With influenza and most diseases we have with chickens, that really isn't an option. Even coccidiosis, we can only treat them up till 16 weeks. Once they lay their first egg, you can't treat them anymore for that. There are no treatments that are approved in adult birds. Doesn't really cause a problem normally, but most, we just don't have good treatments. The second is vaccinating. So if they get exposed, they don't get sick. Again, not an option with this, not an option for very many poultry diseases. The third way, the way that really is the most important, the easiest and best way to do it is called biosecurity. Keeping your birds away from the diseases that can make them sick. It's quarantining, yeah, to some extent, quarantine's part of it. But it's just cleaning stuff, keeping things away. There's a couple of real, just quick, simple things we can do. So the first thing is keeping the distance, keeping your birds separate from sources of disease, whether that's wild birds, whether that's your friend who also has chickens at home that lost 3 chickens last week, those kind of things.
Yeah, don't invite them over.
Yeah,
Don't
restrict
talk to them for
access
a
to your
couple
property, whether it's their birds, other people, whatever those risks may be in your case. Prevent contact with wild birds as much as possible. Really, it's the waterfowl we're most concerned about. I'm not recommending you need to put a second fence inside your backyard to protect your 3 chickens you have in your backyard. But some sort of separation is important. If you've got a pond, putting some sort of separating fence, keeping chickens up close to the barn if you can't keep the wild ducks and geese out of the pond. The next thing is keeping things clean. Washing your hands after working with your birds, especially for the little ones. And it's amazing how often we get reports of this. Keeping the chicks out of their mouth, the little ones' mouths. The state of Oregon, you laugh, but the state of Oregon
No,
actually,
I'm waiting for you to tell
So the state of Oregon actually has a
the
law
campaign.
that you cannot sell turtles that the shell is less than 4 inches across.